We've got a half season's worth of data accumulated in the NFL right now, and you have to ask yourself the question, which guys are going to stay the rest of the year? Which guys are going to fall off? I'm going to try to answer that in today's version of the SPAGS Rankings, of course, for Week 10. What are the SPAGS Rankings? Of course, a ranking of superior players and great spots is what we try to encapsulate here. I always say the wrong word to lead off the intro, but basically what we're trying to do is use a couple of various data points that are important to me, expected points added metrics, volume metrics, red zone metrics, all that rolled up into one number to find out who are the guys who are outperforming things the most, who are the guys who are falling short. Let's talk about it. Let's get into it right now. And it does seem like we're actually live today, so no issues like yesterday, thank God, which broke my brain a little bit on the best ball review video. But let's talk about it. Let's start off the QBs. And I think one thing I want to highlight right away, you are not going to see CJ Stroud in the top 10. He's behind me. He's on the thumbnail. I love CJ Stroud, and I've loved CJ Stroud. I first talked about rookies back in January, thought that the way that he plays is going to think that adds a lot of value to players around him. This is something that we talked about with Reese Hall on the Monday Night Showdown video, as well as some of the comments that I got last week on the SPAGS Rankings videos. Just because you like a player, just because I like a player, it doesn't change the data. It doesn't change what the guy's been doing. And CJ Stroud, the biggest issue for a guy like him is that last week was the first week that he's actually had. The Texans overall have had a pass rate of over expectation for themselves. Every other week besides that, they've been -5%, -8%, -10%. So when you are looking at kind of a half season of numbers, you have to put aside the personal biases. And I do think a guy like Stroud, if he keeps passing, 5% above expectation, he's probably going to hit those nuts more and more down the home stretch. Before he's been for the first half of the year, you can't really vault him all the way up just because of one good game. So that's part of the process that I do think I need to outline right away, because I love the guys. I'm a human being just like you guys watching this video. I want to see the guys that I like a lot do really well, and yet we still have Baker Mayfield the 5 spot. But that's because Baker Mayfield just keeps doing this every week, keeps getting dropbacks, keeps being creating efficiency for all the players around him and for himself, keeps running more than you'd expect. These are things that I have to highlight right away, because I think it's one thing people are not getting with the SPAGS Rankings based on the comments that I get. And look, you're allowed to feel however you want about players. I'm allowed to as well. But ultimately, a data point is a data point. The SPAGS ranking, the SPAGS score that does make it up. These are all things that are just data points. So just something to keep in mind here as we talk about it. Doesn't mean I hate your favorite player. It just means that this is what the numbers say. Speaking of guys that I hate, now I like Jalen Hurts quite a bit, though being in Philly obviously does warp you a little bit against the Jalen Hurtses of the world. But Jalen Hurts on the year, what he does, we highlight every single week here: 14.2 rushes plus deep throws a game. How does a fantasy quarterback add the most value to you? That's getting the ball downfield, that's running the ball, especially in the red zone. Jalen Hurts, 4.4 deep shots per year, 9.8 rushes per year. So he's the closest running back to getting 10, or closest quarterback rather, to getting 10 rushing attempts per game. He's also getting 3.1 red zone rush attempts, solid EPAs everywhere. He's actually come up in terms of the efficiency, up to a 0.1 EPA per drop back, 0.04 EPA per pass. Still not as good as he was last year, but he's great. And again, he's now putting some distance between him and guys like Josh Allen. And that SPAGS score, you can see a difference in 9 points there. That's because that's how much more value that Jalen Hurts is adding with every possession, how many more dropbacks he's getting, how many more runs he's getting. All of that, he's better than Josh Allen. And so that is what makes a sliver of difference between a guy like Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. The one thing you could say that the SPAGS rankings won't reflect, but could sort of get reflected down the home stretch, the Bills defense is a lot worse than the Eagles defense. So that is something to me that maybe Allen can close the gap a little bit here. But Hurts' efficiency, the fact that the Eagles are good, putting up a lot of points, there's no down games for the Eagles like we have seen for the Bills. And I think that is why Jalen Hurts a pretty clear number one. He should hold on to that spot, I would think, barring injury the rest of the year. And I guess even with injury, he'd probably hold on to it the rest of the year. Josh Allen comes in at number 2. Josh Allen's efficiency metrics have also been solid on the year: 0.08 EPA per pass, 0.1 EPA per drop back. Secondly, a little bit better than Jalen Hurts in terms of just the pure efficiency, where Josh Allen is not creating value. And again, this is the difference point between a high ceiling breaking fantasy quarterback and one that's just doing a good job week to week. Allen's throwing it deep 3.3 times per game. He's running 4.9 times per game. So we're talking almost half the amount of deep throws and run plays. That is something that gives you less of a floor, gives you less of a ceiling to have those 40-point days like Josh Allen. Of course, Josh Allen could still get there, could still run in a couple touchdowns. He does have 1.6 red zone rushes per game as well in the year, but again, half of Jalen Hurts. So that is why Jalen Hurts to me is here. Josh Allen is still right here. Both guys great picks as elite QBs, and ultimately both guys that in a best ball format and a season-long format, you lose to any QB if you have these guys, but you're certainly going to feel the best in terms of that median projection, in terms of that middle outcome you're going to get with guys like Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. Number 3 is Patrick Mahomes on this list. Mahomes coming down a little bit over the last few weeks. Obviously, the defense, I think, is a big thing you can point to for the Chiefs. Just Mahomes doesn't have to really force the ball quite as much. He still will. That's kind of his game style. But still for Patrick Mahomes, he's only at a 0.06 EPA per pass, 0.11 EPA per dropback. So he's perfectly fine. Negative 0.37 EPA per pressured plays. Maybe not getting as much touchdown on pressure as you would think a guy like Mahomes would take advantage of. It's a 2.4% touchdown rate on pressure plays. And he's thrown it deep 3.7 times a game, running 4.7. So again, we're not seeing the high volume of deep balls, which for a guy like Mahomes, especially, who is one of the best passers in the league, I'm not breaking anything new to you guys by saying that. Mahomes, you really do want to see him get the ball downfield, be more of a, CJ Stroud type, again, off that 1 week sample size, a guy who's going to create value for his receivers. But because the Chiefs don't have to do that because their defense being so good, I don't know that we could see Mahomes really move past this number 3 spot overall. He doesn't run enough. He's not getting the red zone rushes. He does run efficiently for whenever he does run, but that's just not the game. It's not what they're trying to do with him. There's a couple plays floating around on social media this week as well where Chiefs could have run sneaks where they're not even lining up to stop a sneak because the Chiefs just don't run that tush push, the brotherly shove, the whatever you want to call the QB sneak that's working so well. The Chiefs don't run that. So there's more ceiling for Mahomes to hit as a rusher, more upside potentially, but just not the way the Chiefs want to play into things. Don't want to risk hurting Mahomes again, as we saw last year. Obviously, they still had the good run despite Mahomes being banged up, but you don't want to go through the playoffs again with Mahomes the high ankle sprain, doing the best he can to survive. So that is something where you're not seeing the upside from Mahomes, and you probably won't see it with how good this defense has been. In terms of just obviously the rushing upside in particular. Lamar Jackson's rushing game is what's keeping him afloat. I know there's some metrics out there, our old pals from the former Football Outsiders DVOA numbers reflecting really well upon Baltimore. I do think with Baltimore, though, Lamar still not the most efficient QB in the world, negative 0.04 EPA per pass, negative 0.01 EPA per dropback. On pressure plays, he does fall apart a little bit, or at least worse than average, negative 0.5 EPA on pressured plays, thankfully only getting pressured on 12 plays per game. But he's running 9.3 times per game. So again, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, in terms of the rushing upside, in terms of guys that can break a slate in pretty much any matchup because of what they do as rushers, that is where Lamar and Jalen Hurts stand a tier above. There's nobody above 8 in the league in terms of run plays per game. Justin Fields is closest at 7.8. So that's a pretty big difference. Even one rush per game can be, for a guy like Lamar, that could be 50 yards. But obviously, could also be a touchdown, could be just even 1 point that can be the difference between you winning and losing a week. So for Lamar, he's playing great. The Ravens playing great. A lot of positive signal for them in terms of how they're moving. I think Lamar is live to move past Patrick Mahomes on these rankings. Maybe tough to move past Josh Allen, though. If he gets a little more efficient, Lamar could take this number 2 spot overall. But I think right now, Lamar is probably, he should finish the year as a number 3, I would think at the least. But for right now, Lamar is playing well, certainly getting you the results you want to see. But I do think you would like to see a little bit more of in the pass game, especially if you are trying to stack up your QB. I think despite the move with Todd Monken becoming the offensive coordinator for Baltimore, we haven't seen this offense really take a big shift where you can really rely on Baltimore stacks every week. We're kind of still in the same situation where Lamar might get there, one of the running backs might get there, but Andrews, we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but the volume is not as great as some of the other elite tight ends. The upside not there every week. Odell's upside certainly not there every week. Zay Flowers might be banged up. His upside's not there. Rashad Bateman, we know the case. So that makes it a little bit tougher in terms of DFS tournaments. But Lamar as a player, the upside is huge just because what he can do as an individual. And I still wouldn't play him naked in the current DFS environment. Like, you got to stack him up still. But the tough part is just those stacks might not get there even if Lamar does. Baker Mayfield, back to number 5 here. Baker, what he just does is drops back a lot per game, 40 dropbacks per game, negative 0.01 EPA per pass, 0.01 EPA per dropbacks, actually getting a little bit more value in the unscripted kind of plays that he's getting. Under pressure, he's at a perfectly fine negative 0.3 EPA. Deep balls, though, is what he's doing well. 4.4 deep balls per game, 4.4 runs per game. For Baker Mayfield, it's not what you expect of a guy like Baker. This is what he's been doing all year, and this is part of why, too, I think the Bucs defensively has some real weaknesses downfield. I think you're going to see them be in a lot of shootouts. I think that this week, and it's kind of tough because, again, we just saw this happen last week with Bucs Texans. I think the Bucs are live potentially for another shootout. Depends on how Will Levis plays on the Titan side of the equation. But because of the way the Bucs play, because of how Baker hangs in these games, I do think the Bucs are actually live to have another potential high-scoring game here. The Vegas total not supporting that, but it didn't last week either. I think a lot of that is because of how Baker plays, because of how this defense for the Bucs play. I think you're going to see Baker have a lot more upside than you'd probably think. And again, I talked about my best ball review show that we did yesterday. My Baker team is the best team I have in Best Ball Mania, top 10,000 team right now in terms of its points scored. And it's Baker's actually putting up points, even though Lamar is on that team. So I think Baker's just one of those guys that quietly has been a lot more involved, a lot more important than it might seem for a Bucs offense. It's clearly being out of a lot of the expectations that we've seen, including them being a bottom 5 team throughout the course of the year in terms of the odds. Shout out to the chat as well. Do you like Prescott over Goff rest of the season? I would prefer Prescott. Yeah. Elite QB looking good. It is looking good, but I think for a best ball kind of construct, it doesn't matter as much. For the regular season prize total, absolutely does matter. But really, again, we saw it last year. Hurts ended up missing 2 playoff games on best ball. Josh Allen had one that obviously went away because of the DeMar Hamlin situation. But I think Elite QB looking good. It's obviously going to look good, but that was what you needed them to be. Like if they weren't number 1, 2, 3 right now, you would be completely buried by ADP. So I don't think you're getting anything you weren't expecting with how you drafted these guys. We have zero data. Where would you rank Murray if he actually finishes the season? I think he's so like there's 2 things that run against Murray. Number 1 is that if he keeps playing, they're going to win more games theoretically than they would have. And right now they're in prime position to be tanking for a top draft pick. So I would say where he ranks is probably top 20, but not, I don't think more than that. I really don't believe in this Cardinals offense overall. I don't think they have a ton of talent. And I do think Murray's going to be a better version of what Josh Dobbs was in terms of the floor. In terms of the ceiling, though, like Dobbs actually did hit his ceiling pretty well, ran with a little more volume than we've seen Murray run recently. Murray clearly terrified to take hits in the last few years. So the other part of Murray, too, is that there's a chance that they just have him play for a few weeks, show he's healthy, and then that's it. And then they play Clayton Tune and just run out the string and lose some more games to enhance their draft pick. So for Murray, I think that people are going to be really excited about him. Obviously, if you drafted him, you're excited to finally see him play. Part of the reason I didn't draft him at all this offseason was because I thought he was going to miss at least half the year. That's now come true. And it could end up being worse that he misses half the year, comes in, plays a few games, shows he's healthy, and it's like, all right, well, there's no point in continuing to play him because they basically need him to be healthy heading into next year for them, or need him to be healthy to trade him. And I think that's something where having that flexibility is going to be the main thing for the Cardinals. Hey, shout out Marcus here. Thanks for the show, Spags. I appreciate it. Of course, the Spags rankings are a unique kind of construct here. We're just talking about players and how they've done all year and how we're expecting them to move. So obviously not be as directly transactional for week 10 coming up. But I think when you find out like who the good guys are every week, who's been performing the best every week, it sort of gives you a baseline. And then just weird things are going to happen still, like Alvin Kamara losing his role. But I think it's important to know where these guys are because, like nobody has Baker Mayfield in the top 5 of rankings. But in terms of what he's doing in terms of efficiency and volume and the opportunity he has, like, I don't think he's going to beat Lamar straight up very often. I don't think he's going to beat Jalen Hurts straight up very often. But I do think for a guy like Baker Mayfield, what he does where he's ranked here is a reflection on what this offense could be week to week. What about when Kyler plays more games than AR? That's not even, what are you trying to dunk on me here? If he plays more games, he's probably still not going to have the same ceiling because he's not going to run as much. So I think there's probably, I would say it's a 50-50 shot that he plays as many games as AR. AR played 4 games this year. Kyler, I think by the time we get to week 13, week 14, you're probably getting closer to seeing Kyler not play, but we'll find out. But thanks for that weird chat. Justin Herbert. Let's go. Let's keep it going here. Justin Herbert, 40.3 dropbacks per game. That is good. 0.05 EPA per pass, 0.05 EPA per dropback. Struggling under pressure with a negative 0.43 EPA. 4 deep throws per game, 4 rushes per game. The one that jumped out to me is just that Herbert not being used in terms of being a fantasy-friendly QB the same way that Baker Mayfield is. Like he's getting less volume and deep throws than Baker Mayfield, running less than Baker Mayfield. These are things for Justin Herbert where he, in my ideal world for Justin Herbert, he would have played a lot more like Dak Prescott last year. We saw some deep shots, saw some run plays. Obviously for Dak, that had some interception kind of effects on what he does with his game. But in this spot for a guy like Justin Herbert, like I don't think he hits a ceiling as a player unless he starts to meaningfully get the ball downfield more. And that's not been the case with how the Chargers are playing. And it's probably not going to be the case moving forward either, given that Keenan Allen obviously going to be more of a slot guy. Quentin Johnson doesn't have that trust outside. Josh Palmer out for another 3 weeks. So for Justin Herbert, I think in this situation, he's okay. I think he's doing a good job. He's certainly reflecting better relative to ADP than a guy like Trevor Lawrence. But Justin Herbert, to me, I don't think has the same ceiling right now. And it's also because Keenan Allen doesn't have the same ceiling. Like he hasn't had a ceiling game in about a month now. All of that kind of hurts Justin Herbert in a meaningful way. And the Chargers, too, I think have had a kind of a weird run of schedule where they haven't had to really press their offense moving forward. Maybe if they get in a few more shootouts, obviously going to have some big games versus Denver coming up. You could still see Herbert have the spike weeks moving forward. But I do think in terms of week-to-week production, especially in games that are not going to be the most positive game script, not the highest over-under, I kind of think that's where the Chargers struggle a little bit more. But it probably won't be the case this week for him. Should be in a good spot. Dak Prescott. So Dak is a guy dropping back, not that much, but the numbers are coming up week to week, 37.8 dropbacks per game. Earlier in the season, he was looking more like a Brock Purdy, a guy that his coaches were not allowing him to drop back that much because they had the faith in the defense. Cowboys D, now a lot of injuries going their way. The defense not looking quite as good, though. Certainly going to look great against the Giants with an 11-point implied total this week. For Dak, though, just having more pass game upside. It's the thing that jumps out to me for this week as well playing against the Giants is how the Cowboys played against the Rams recently, where they were up big against the Rams. And, the Rams are a team that can create a lot of points fast. So maybe that won't be the case, but they did keep passing that game in that game, did keep feeding CeeDee Lamb meaningfully. So it's possible that you see Dak Prescott actually have a little more upside in some of these games where the Cowboys are going to actually have things in hand and not be pressed into action, having to score the points. They might just score the points on their own. But we'll see how that goes this week, because this is really the big litmus test for the Cowboys, where they should win this one easily. Tommy DeVito just is not an NFL QB. I don't even think he's an NFL backup, a caliber QB, but he is a guy that's going out there and probably not going to put up a lot of production. So if the Cowboys hang 50 on the Giants, you'll know that you can trust the Cowboys to kind of have those big outlier days, even when the opposing offense doesn't push them. But if they end up kind of calling off the dogs and running a lot of Tony Pollard, or even worse for Pollard owners, maybe a lot of Rico Dowdle, could be something that, you don't trust Dak moving forward in games where the Cowboys are not going against an offense that's going to actually put up points against them. And obviously the last two games, Rams, Eagles, those were games where Dak actually had to put up points just to stay competitive, or in the Rams spot, just to keep them at bay and make sure they didn't come from behind and steal one in that one. Tua falls a little bit here. Not a great game in Frankfurt for Tua. Poor rushing as well keeps him kind of a little bit lower than I feel like he should be. Obviously, the pass game upside is still there in a major way for Tua. 0.14 EPA per pass, one of the best marks in the league. 0.08 EPA in the dropbacks per dropback, same thing as well, one of the best marks in the league. Sees pressure under 10 plays per game, which is actually one of the best things in the league as well for a QB. He's the only guy I'm seeing on the top 15 QBs who has been pressured under 10 plays a game. Only other guy was Anthony Richardson, of course. So bless his heart. Besides that, though, Tua, the deep shots have come down from 3.6 deep shots per game, just 2.6 run plays per game. And again, Tua is not good at them. Negative 1.1 EPA on those plays, and that excludes QB kneels. So for Tua Tagovailoa, I think the issue with him is just that he's not creating the same level of volume and value of a guy like Jalen Hurts, of a Lamar. I don't think he can get to that tier. And if he is going to get to that tier, he probably just needs Tyreek Hill to keep going off every week. Jalen Waddle getting healthier, going off every week. That can push Tua up. But I think his ceiling is still there. He's kind of like a CJ Stroud to me, where the entire offense working means Tua comes up. But in games where like the offense isn't humming, where guys aren't getting 100-yard receiving days, 150, 200-yard receiving days, you're just not going to see Tua make a winning lineup that frequently in DFS and not have 30-point upside for the most part. That makes it tough for Tua, but I still think he should be. In my heart, I think he's a better play than Baker Mayfield. Baker runs just enough and with just enough efficiency that that kind of keeps him at bay. And I don't know if that's correct, but we'll reevaluate the SPAGS score once we get to the offseason. Brock Purdy. So he is a guy with a lot of fluidity here, where Brock Purdy, people are really down on him. Still the best QB in the league per pass, 0.2 EPA per pass, 0.22 EPA per dropback, also the best mark in the league. The issue, as we talked about in the past with Brock Purdy, he doesn't drop back enough, 31 dropbacks per game. He's basically 10 less than a lot of other guys in this spot. Josh Allen drops back 40.1 times per game. Patrick Mahomes drops back 41.4 times per game. You can't be 10 dropbacks less and have the same upside for a guy like Brock Purdy. That said, he's so efficient that he does sometimes show that upside, and you go, oh, Brock Purdy, like great player to go to. But if he doesn't get the volume, if the players aren't crushing it and he doesn't get the volume, you don't see him get there. He's only got 2.4 deep throws per game, 3.3 rushes per game. I would really hope that after the bye, the Niners realize they can't just coast off this defense like they have in the past. And that is something that could lead to more potential for Brock Purdy to actually get the ball downfield, play a little bit outside of just this comfort zone the Niners are seemingly settled into. So Brock Purdy is a guy that I actually think should ascend moving forward. They have not run away with the NFC West in a way that you would think the Niners should have based on their talent. They've lost a lot of games that they clearly should not have lost over the last few weeks. So for Brock Purdy, I think it all depends what we see in this week coming up here. But I think if you really see him go hard here, you see him drop back a lot against the Jacksonville team that we know can put up points on their side. I think it's going to be a good sign for Brock Purdy moving forward, because if you're dropping out 40 times a game, I think he'd be a top 5 QB in the league right now based on these metrics, and honestly based on his fantasy performance as well. But because of the fact that the Niners are just playing so slow still, playing that same close to the vest style, he's just not getting there. Number 10 would have been Kirk Cousins, but of course he is out for the year, but had great results on the year. Derek Carr comes in at number 10, and this is one where I don't necessarily love how this aligned, but that's sort of the point of data, is that the data is not always going to tell you, again, like what you want to hear. It's going to tell you what's there. Derek Carr, the reason he's making it here is he's just efficient enough. He does drop back 38 times per game. He doesn't get pressured a lot, 13 pressured plays per game. He's thrown it deep 5 times per game. It's just the issue with him is he's thrown it deep 5 times per game. It's a 0.13 EPA on those plays. only 1.6 completions on deep throws. So there feels like there should be a run good for Derek Carr. I talked about it yesterday. I think Derek Carr's biggest issues right now are that one, he's now losing red zone passes to Taysom Hill. So you're not only losing the overall red zone opportunity to create value, create touchdowns, but you're also losing actual quarterback plays, which is not great for Derek Carr. That said, he's getting it downfield with talented receivers. So I think Derek Carr makes sense. He does come up a lot in sims, does come up a lot in projections because of the fact that he has these talented guys around him where there should theoretically be a ceiling for Derek Carr that comes with that. But because of Taysom Hill carving so much away, Derek Carr could fall down to 20 and it wouldn't shock me. But I think there is still like him hanging around this top 10. And he's been around this range for basically the entire season. Like there's a spike week in there somewhere. It's just that you probably need Taysom to not be involved in that game. And we'll see with the Saints. Saints gave Taysom more work than they gave Kamara last week. So I know that that's an expectation you'd want to have. Guys not that far behind Derek Carr, Stafford, Will Levis. Will Levis, again, throws a lot of deep shots, also runs a lot. 7 deep shots per game for Will Levis would actually be the highest mark in the league, but obviously that is a small sample size of 2 games there. But Will Levis, I think, if he could absolutely bust this week, can have a terrible game. I think he's a very sneaky quarterback going against the Bucs. Just what we saw CJ Stroud do. I think if they let Will Levis, if they take the governor off, they let him actually get it downfield like they did in that first game, I think Will Levis might be actually a sneaky play. And but we'll see, because the downside for Will Levis is also pretty huge. But Will Levis, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, those are the guys there. And to talk quickly about why Stroud doesn't make the lineup or doesn't make the top 10 here, he does have a 0.09 EPA per pass, 0.09 EPA per drop back. Really bad under pressure still, though. Negative 0.7 EPA per pressured plays. Has not thrown a touchdown under pressure yet. It's taken a sack 17% of the time the pressure gets home, which actually should be a little bit worse. But Stroud, I think, has done a good job being evasive in the pocket, even though he's not the most mobile. The part with Stroud that's fucked up, he's thrown it deep only 2.9 times per game, but he's actually the best deep ball QB in the league right now. 1.28 EPA per deep throw. So he's adding basically 1.3 points every time he's getting the ball downfield. But because that's happening, it's baffling that they're not throwing it deep more. But again, only 2.9 deep throws per game is not that much. Stroud also has a 17% touchdown rate in his deep throws. So if they let him, if what we saw last week is a sign of everything the Texans are going to do moving forward, CJ Stroud has the potential to be a top 5 QB the rest of this year, next year, all of that. The thing is that I just don't trust that the Texans are going to do that moving forward. They absolutely should, but the Bucs defense really did lend itself to the way they played last week. So this is going to be a big test coming up for CJ Stroud. I believe they're going against Cincinnati. Situation for Stroud here, if he comes through in this spot, and a spot where they have to produce points, but the matchup is not as cozy, you see him passing a lot here, I think that'd be a really big sign that Stroud is a guy you can really trust down the home stretch. If you don't see Stroud dropping back as many times, if you see him kind of chunk playing away, not necessarily getting the ball downfield for the splash plays, that is something where I think CJ Stroud could end up having a little bit of a tougher time, and it might just be a 1-week aberration. But this week coming up is going to be a big litmus test for CJ Stroud for sure. All right, let's keep it going here. Wish I had some more Levis. Going to sprinkle in more backup QBs next year. I mean, it's not necessarily backup QBs. I guess in this case it was with guys like Dobbs. But Dobbs, I know some people pushed back yesterday. Our guy Ross said he had 8% Dobbs, and some people commented back like, oh, that's not actually a good play. And I guess it depends when you draft that at 8%. For a pure backup, like a pure handcuff, like you shouldn't draft the Mike Whites of the world too much, but you should draft the rookie. You could win a starting job potentially a little bit more, and that's where Levis did have that upside. Same thing for all, the other rookie QBs. Those guys obviously all got in action for week 1, so that ended up being a different situation than a lot of other years. But it's not just backup QBs; it's more backup QB who could win a role and maybe has some good traits. And Levis did not play well last year, but did have some good traits in terms of throwing deep balls, in terms of running. So that's just it. It's just you throw it deep, you run, you're gonna have a little more upside. But then the downside is if you're not that talented, you get a game like Will Levis put up on Thursday Night Football, which is not that great. Let's keep it going here. Let's talk about the running backs coming up next. And let's start off with Christian McCaffrey. So Alvin Kamara has been number 1 in these SPAGS rankings for the last few weeks, and it's taken a big fall here. And the reason why is because Alvin Kamara is now down under 24 intended touches per game, or opportunities, whatever you want to call it. But he's at 24 per game. Christian McCaffrey, being more efficient, is at 21.8 with more red zone work as well. McCaffrey, 4.5 red zone rushes per game, 0.9 red zone targets per game for McCaffrey. So the workload there is the main thing, the opportunity. McCaffrey, like a lot of running backs, get a lot of volume. Not fantastic in the other outlier metrics. Guys like a 15% avoided tackle rate is Christian McCaffrey on the year. Ideally, 25%, 30% would be a real world beater. But McCaffrey, older, doesn't have the same juice as when he was a kid. First coming in, getting 25 touches a game. So nothing surprising there, but McCaffrey, that is part of the flaw there. Negative 0.03 EPA per rush for him, but run play is inherently less efficient. That's fine. Where McCaffrey really does excel, though, 0.46 EPA per pass. He gets targets out wide. He gets targeted out of the slot. He gets targeted everywhere. So I think for McCaffrey, the pass game work being there, and it's not a fluky thing where there isn't a week where a Taysom Hill comes in and upsets Christian McCaffrey workload, like what happened for Alvin Kamara this past week. For McCaffrey, the workload's going to be there, and the Niners, again, have to put up more points because this defense is not the defense of last year, and I don't think trading for Chase Young materially changes that. So for McCaffrey, I expect him to hold on to the spot. The workload could catch up with him. The injury risk can catch up with him and all of that. McCaffrey, I think, should be number one, should hold as number one, unless Kamara comes back again and gets 40 touches, which we've seen happen with guys like Saquon recently. That can happen, but I think the Saints kind of felt like a deliberate move away from Kamara, which we'll talk about in a moment. David Montgomery comes back this week. Obviously, some big risks for him. I do think he needs to hold on to at least 20 touches a game to have sort of confidence in what he can do moving forward. The red zone work alone, though, is so good that he'll be fine. 5.4 red zone rushes per game, 3.2 inside the 10-yard line per game. That's something he's not going to lose to Jahmyr Gibbs, no matter how good Gibbs was when he was out. So far, the coach speak seems to be that it's going to be a 50-50 split between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. So 50-50 split, maybe not good, but 50-50 split with all the goal line work, all the red zone work still going Montgomery's way. He can get there. I don't expect him to hold on to this number 2 spot. I do think he probably comes under 20 touches a game moving forward, but it depends on the game script. If the Lions are ahead, probably gets closer to 20 plus touches. If the Lions are behind, probably closer to 15 touches, I think will be how it goes for David Montgomery. And I wouldn't say I expect him to fall off because of the touchdown run good for a Lions offense that has been clearly able to get the ball where they need to get it. So for Montgomery, don't think he holds on to the 2 spot, but I think it would be a surprise to me if he didn't stay top 10 the rest of the year just because of the workload and how good the Lions are and him rising with that tide. So weird game for Alvin Kamara at the 3 spot. The roll went away, and not only did it go away in this past week, week 9, it also was away in the first drive where they had Jamal Williams there for the first drive. Again, we had Taysom Hill playing a lot more snaps, both at running back as well as at QB. That's not great for Kamara. Kamara's entire thing has been just getting crazy work, getting a lot of targets per game, still in the year at 8.2 targets per game, 15.8 rushes per game. If that comes down, if he comes under 20 touches, which was my thesis heading into the year, and I kind of backed off of it, but I thought this would be a year where no running back averaged over 20 touches per game. Kamara can trend that way if they just keep using Taysom Hill as they've been using him, as well as mixing in Jamal Williams, mixing in Kendre Miller, who got banged up last game. They should want to see more of Miller to know what they have moving forward because Miller has a lot of juice, and we're seeing guys like Keaton Mitchell get out there and have big games. And Kendre Miller, I would say, based on how they played in college, relative especially to competition, Kendre Miller is a lot better player than Keaton Mitchell, even though Keaton Mitchell, got a lot of juice in terms of the avoided tackles and all that. I do think that for Kamara, I would expect him to start to fall. That usage last week, there's no real reason why to do it. It wasn't a great run game matchup, but they still could have gotten involved in the pass game and kind of didn't. So if he loses the overall volume and if he loses red zone work, Kamara's live to fall pretty heavily. He's another guy I think doesn't fall the top 10 unless we really see the Taysom run hot continue in a major way. But Kamara, I assume you can't trade in your redraft leagues unless you have a really weird one at this point. I'd be willing to trade Kamara off that one bad game, and I guess probably the time to really do it would have been before that last one, but we'll see what happens this week. Obviously, could have been one weird week of usage, but the Saints have a history of falling out of love with Alvin Kamara. We saw it last year with them, really feeding the ball to Mark Ingram. This year, it seemed like they don't trust Jamal Williams, don't trust Kendre Miller enough. They do trust Taysom Hill enough, so that is something that if Taysom continues to get like 10 touches a game, I think that could be pretty tough for him moving forward, for Kamara moving forward. Coming up behind Kamara actually would be Kyren Williams, but he's going to be out until week 12 was the most recent quote from Sean McVay. So I'm not going to keep him on the rankings here, but Kyren Williams role, one of the best in football. We'll see how that holds up with the Rams offense going the wrong way. Kyren, I would still make a bet on, I believe. I think Carson Wentz definitely going to be an improvement on Brett Rippon, even if he's not going to be a one-to-one with Matthew Stafford. So I think for Kyren Williams, he'll be okay. But again, he's not in the rankings because he's not playing for 2 more weeks. So no reason to put him in. Josh Jacobs, still a negative EPA rusher, negative 0.13 EPA per rush, negative 0.16 EPA per pass. What he's got going for him is this commitment that Antonio Pierce is showing towards giving him the ball. He's basically said they want Josh Jacobs to get 100 rushing yards a game. Obviously, if they do stick to that, that's going to be another 3 points a game on DraftKings and going to bode pretty well overall in terms of the opportunity. But I think the opportunity is there for him. If the Raiders, again, just sometimes it's getting rid of the coach who's like, toxic, who's really killing what you're doing. USC, great example of that a couple of years ago, or I guess now fucking more than a couple, when they fired Lane Kiffin, Ed Orgeron coming in as a morale guy who really did not know game calling. It was more of a recruiter, more of a kind of motivational guy, more of an O-line guy / D-line guy than anything else. And just having a coach who they didn't hate really made that USC team start to play well down the stretch. That is something where I think the Raiders are kind of having that same experience with Josh McDaniels, a very much a control freak, guy they did not like, got fired apparently because Antonio Pierce made a remark about how when they were on the Giants, they were like, hey, we just had to believe we could beat anybody, and that's how we beat the Patriots. And Josh McDaniels, if you didn't see this report, apparently then told Antonio Pierce, you don't talk shit about the Patriots. So point being, just getting the black cloud off of you that was Josh McDaniels, probably a good thing for the Raiders, but in particular, defensive-minded coach, loves to run the ball. It's always how it goes. Defensive-minded coaches want to keep control for the defense. Josh Jacobs is going to benefit from that, even though he is not himself this year. Last year, he had a 33% avoided tackle rate. This year, 11%. Jacobs' juice is gone. It's just the volume is king, and that's always going to be the case here, even though I'd rather have all efficient players. Volume players are going to get you a lot more points in fantasy, for the most part. Saquon Barkley, speaking of. So this is going to be the real test of the volume play. Saquon on the year, now up to 25.8 opportunities / intended touches per game. Saquon, we've seen, have 40 touches in a game. The issue is now bad offensive line and the least competent starting QB in the league in Tommy DeVito. I honestly, if I were the Giants, and it doesn't behoove them at this point, they should try to lose out at this point just to get some optionality of what they're going to do in the draft. They should bring in Colin Kaepernick. They should bring in I know it's not the first thing people want to hear. I'm not political, but Colin Kaepernick is a better QB than Tommy DeVito. A lot of guys off the street are a better QB than Tommy DeVito. A lot of the XFL and USFL guys are on depth charts somewhere, so they might not be available. But Tommy DeVito is so bad that he's going to crater everything this offense does. Your hope is going to be that Saquon gets you 10 checkdowns a game and a touchdown, and he can do that. But Saquon is so inefficient, negative 0.17 EPA per rush, negative 0.26 EPA per pass, that efficiency is not going to get better with Tommy DeVito behind center. So for Saquon, I do expect him to not hold up the rest of the year. I expect him to start to come down. He had one of the best matchups in football a couple times in the last few weeks. Has not gotten there. So for Saquon, I just think that this is kind of it for him. Unless they sign a QB who can actually add value and keep, be a league average QB. Tommy DeVito is bottom 2 percentile QB, bottom 5 percentile. He's Nathan Peterman level, maybe a little bit less interceptions. And that's not where you want him to be. Almost no Kamara, Barkley, and Mixon. I think, look, the Kamara part doesn't feel great. Just signed Matt Barkley to the active roster. How's that do for you? I mean, Barkley's not been good for a while. Glad to see another USC guy getting a job, but I would think that's an improvement on DeVito, but they still have to learn the offense. Barkley does come from a Buffalo offense, obviously having been the Bills' backup QB before, so he should be a little bit faster to see the field, but I would think that you see DeVito initially, and then maybe they go to Barkley when they realize DeVito just can't do shit, which they should have already realized at this point, quite frankly. Tony Pollard comes up next. Pollard, so there are reports out there from Dallas beat writers that Rico Dowdle might get in the mix more. Unclear if that's just them speculating about the fact that Tony Pollard's not been that effective, obviously, but could also be a team / coach thing that they picked up on. So that's something to watch out for. Tony Pollard, though, this matchup, again, coming against the Giants is a really big litmus test for Tony Pollard. If he can't get there, and Tony Pollard is still hanging on, 4.1 red zone rushes per game, 2.3. It's at the 10-yard line per game. That's held up, even though, the volume has come down a lot from the beginning of the year, where he's getting basically 10 red zone touches a game. So we're not at the same level. But this spot against the Giants is one where Pollard needs to get going. If Pollard doesn't put up a good game in one where the Cowboys are a 17-point favorite, there's no chance for Pollard moving forward. So that is something where I think for Pollard, we are coming into a crucial week for both him and Dak and CeeDee Lamb, where just whatever happens this week against the Giants is going to tell a pretty big picture about how the Cowboys are going to roll the rest of the year. So I would really pay close attention to that game. It's going to be an ugly one. Again, 11-point total is, I think, honestly, might be the lowest I've seen in 5 years of doing this professionally since starting at Stochastic many moons ago. So I think that for this spot here, make or break for Tony Pollard, but also if he doesn't get here, he's just never going to get there. You can't not get there as a 17-point favorite. You're just toast. There's no chance. Shout out Tyler here. Shout out to chat. Appreciate all you guys being here, of course. Squirt Squad always in the house. Very much. Thank you to you all for your contributions and then building this community up and all that. And don't forget to leave time for 14 NBA games. Mr. Shadow Dog dying for me to cover NBA, and I just won't do it. I won't do it unless I get paid. I'm not getting paid for it. So we're doing the football thing that I get lightly paid for here on Splash Play. Joe Mixon, 0.05 or negative 0.05 EPA per rush, negative 0.1 EPA per pass. The thing that's going to stand out for Joe Mixon is when this Bengals offense is humming, you're going to see Mixon have better days. 3.1 red zone rushes per game for Mixon, 1.9 inside the 10-yard line per game for Mixon, 0.8 inside the red zone targets per game for Mixon. Like, if this offense is getting into the red zone, he's going to get production. If the offense is stalling out and doing what it's been doing in the past, he's not going to get production. It's as simple as that for Joe Mixon. He's not a good player. He's not creating value on his own. His 8% avoided tackle rate is only it's as bad as Alvin Kamara. It's as bad as Tony Pollard. Those are the guys he's lumped in with, guys that are getting there on pure volume. Mixon is not getting the pure volume this year, under 20 intended touches per game. But again, he just needs to be in an effective offense. And if he is, he's going to get there. There's nobody threatening Mixon for touches now. Travion Williams gets a view. Chase Brown, whenever he gets off IR, maybe he gets a few down the home stretch to see what he's got. But it's just nobody coming for the Mixon role. So he's going to rise with the Bengals. And if the Bengals don't rise, he's not going to rise. And that's just how Mixon's going to go. Austin Eckler here, getting close to the end of the running backs. Eckler just less efficient in everything. Negative 0.15 EPA per rush is just down pretty bad on him from last year and definitely to start the year. Negative 0.03 EPA per pass, so definitely not Christian McCaffrey tier, but he's involved enough, getting 5.6 targets per game. For Eckler, the issue is really just that he's not the same dude. He's not getting the same workload. Clearly, the contract stuff is making them not use him quite as much. He's said vocally out loud that he just doesn't want to get the same workload because of the risk that comes with that and because he thinks Josh Kelly can be efficient enough with the touches to keep him there, which has not been the case, but obviously they are giving Kelly enough touches and keep him on the field enough. Eckler's going to get there in games where Keenan Allen can't get there. The pass game can't get there. I have no issue with Eckler. I just don't think that he is a McCaffrey tier player at this point. The Chargers, though, again, do face Denver twice down the home stretch. So I would not fully write off Eckler. He can have big days, absolutely. But I just think that you're seeing closer to like the 20-point ceiling days rather than the 40-point ceiling days. I just don't think the Eckler of last year is going to come out at any time soon. But that's just me. Looks like Connor may come back soon. Where would he land on my rankings? First of all, it's the SPAGS rankings. Let's get the branding right, not the square rankings. Second of all, he's not going to be anywhere close. Like, he would probably be, best case scenario, top 20. He is right now on the cusp of top 20. And that's with not having played in a few weeks and having had the good games that he put up, quote unquote, good games that James Conner's had. It's hard to trust bad running backs on a bad team, or mediocre running backs on a bad team. Just never guys you could really trust. On the plus side, he's probably going to have the full workload in that backfield, but he's running to the same thing as Kyler. I guess poor Charles here loves the Cards and just wants me to say positive things. The Cards are not motivated to win this year. They can't, they would have to win out basically to win the NFC West and maybe even to get a wild card berth. So for the Cardinals, what are they playing for really? If you're James Conner, I think you're playing for your next contract / team most likely. So for Conner, even if he gets out there, even if he's full go, it's like he's probably not playing into week 16, week 17, week 18. So I would not have a lot of faith there. Kenneth Walker's role going the wrong way. He's coming in at number 9, though. Sharps has outsnapped him now last week, so that's not a great sign for Kenneth Walker. The good news for Kenneth Walker is that he's getting touches when he's on the field. Does get an intended touch on 48% of plays that he's on the field. So that's pretty good for Kenneth Walker still. Right in line with every running back. The issue is that snap count coming down, the overall volume coming down, and Charbonnet, again, just does a lot of things that Kenneth Walker can't do. Good pass protector, good pass route runner, good catcher, good guy in the red zone too, even though Walker's obviously gotten the red zone work. So for Walker, I think the role, to me, it's hard for me to believe that he's going to hang on in the top 10 just because Charbonnet is seizing such a meaningful role. And also Kenneth Walker's red zone work down now, and they're 4 red zone touches a game. And he was really high up there in the beginning of the year. You're kind of seeing a Tony Pollard thing with Walker, except that it's the backup running back who's just more of a sound football player, if not an explosive running back. Charbonnet is a guy that you trust in a lot of different packages. Walker, if he's not breaking 50-yard touchdowns or getting in the red zone on easy plays, getting the end zone rather in the red zone on easy plays, he's just not going to have that upside. So that's a big risk point for Kenneth Walker moving forward. Zach Moss comes in at number 10, and it's really a barely a distance between Zach Moss and Travis Etienne. So if you really want to go with it, Etienne makes the top 10 this week. But Zach Moss falling off here, I think played 12 snaps last week. Jonathan Taylor finally grabbing the role fully. Zach Moss has done great with what he's done this year. Negative 0.04 EPA per rush is not great, but 0.22 EPA per pass is pretty good for a running back. And he got 3 red zone rushes per game, 1.5 outside of 10-yard line per game. That's going to go away, though. So Zach Moss, kudos to you. If you drafted him, got to feel good with what you got out of him compared to a Deion Jackson or an Evan Hull. But it's just not going to be good moving forward for Zach Moss because the real alpha's there. The guy they're paying money to is there. Jonathan Taylor, I think, if he gets the Zach Moss upside, Jonathan Taylor is one guy that can absolutely move up. And I think for me, Taylor could move up. It's going to be hard with what he's done so far this year, But I think like if we're just ranking guys off the back half of the year, I think Jonathan Taylor would be a guy that could beat out Saquon, could beat out Pollard, maybe tough to beat out Mixon if the Bengals were running hot. But I think Jonathan Taylor is probably a top 5 running back just based on the combined role of what Zach Moss has done and Jonathan Taylor have done combined. All right, let's keep it going. Good. I'm glad you want that for your Cardinals, Charles, because that's very likely what you're going to get. Unless the Bears go tank mode, which does feel like Tyson Bagent is keeping them a little bit too afloat. Let's move on to receivers, guys. Before we do, quickly, please do subscribe down below. Of course, Splash Play on the march to 3K subs. We're going to hit it before the end of the year, absolutely. But the sooner we hit it, the better it'll be for me and my sanity. So please subscribe down below, hit the like button, leave a comment. And of course, after this video, I will drop the full SPAGS rankings along with a lot of the data points that I pull in from a bunch of sites out there, including Sports Info Solutions. We'll pin that down in the comments below. So check that out after the video ends and go take a look. And that's free to check out for free. And of course, join the Squirt Squad too. $4.99 a month. Hit that join button down below. Get credits at the end of the video. Get a special badge on here. Get access to me if you want it. Get my special data sheet on Saturdays. That is the deal here. If you help support Splash Play, I try to support you. It's all we can ever do. All right, receivers. Tyreek, really bad game for Tyreek this past week. His efficiency metrics dropped off by, I think, 0.2 just about. So tough week for Tyreek. That said, I'm never going to be down on Tyreek. 2.1 deep shots per game. Is catching 1.6 of them. You can make the case that he's absolutely due for some run bad on his deep targets because he's catching everything that's being thrown his way. And he's also got a 1.5 EPA on those targets. So again, Tyreek is great. It's just that at a certain point, I think we kind of saw it in Frankfurt that they're not going to do this against every team. They really have to put it down against the bad teams to kind of keep afloat with the efficiency metrics being where they've been for Tyreek. So great player to me, easy wide receiver 1. But I think a little bit of risk for A.J. Brown coming for him now. As you can see, the SPAGS scores there for both these guys closing in 29.5 for Tyreek, 28.2 for A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, over 10 intended touches per game for him on the year, 2.1 deep shots per game as well, so same as Tyreek. A lot less efficient than Tyreek on those deep plays, catching 0.9 of them for a 0.63 EPA per target, but still great metrics for A.J. Brown. No Dallas Goedert out there for 4 weeks, going to be on IR with a broken forearm. Is probably going to open things up a little bit more, probably helps out Devontae Smith the most, but I do think it increases the potential ceiling for A.J. Brown, just not having to worry about those 5 targets a game going to Dallas Goedert. Jack Stoll, Tyree Jackson, Calcaterra, Albert O, probably not going to get that combined Dallas Goedert workload. So even one more target per game for A.J. Brown could increase the floor and the ceiling. So I think A.J. Brown going to probably hold steady at number 2, but he can move around. Like this top 5 to me, all guys that I think can move around pretty effectively and still have what would be considered a great year. A.J. Brown is where you drafted him. I think you should be happy with what you've gotten out of him. And it's not going to get worse unless the Eagles just keep winning. I guess the one risk point for A.J. Brown is that Eagles right now really running front running in the NFC by a pretty good margin. And there's a shot if they keep playing like this, maybe A.J. Brown doesn't go week 17, which, would be not the best. Justin Jefferson at number 3, putting him back on the list because he's likely not playing in week 10, should be back in week 11. And I think this kind of having Jefferson here, Jefferson is around number 5, number 6 in terms of the SPAGS rankings recently because of the fact that he hasn't been as efficient as he was last year. There's been a lot of guys who've been playing great. I put Jefferson in this week just to kind of reflect the fact that the wide receivers are getting less efficient by the week. Obviously, a lot of that's just going to happen naturally. It's also getting colder out. You're getting some defenses that have a little more tape to go against these guys, but we're seeing the efficiency come down enough that it means that a guy like Justin Jefferson kind of moves up by not playing. So I think that kind of reflects what the picture is overall, and that's why, again, why he's in here is because wide receivers overall, not the world beaters they were to start the year, but that's kind of what you'd expect. And because of that, Justin Jefferson ends up looking better, which, he was the 101, so he should look better. But I do think that with Jefferson being at number 3, it kind of speaks to how guys like Chase getting less efficient, CeeDee Lamb just not getting as much volume, Diggs not being as good, Allen not being as good, Nico Collins not being there anymore. There's nobody kind of threatening as much. And I think that's going to make Jefferson even more value when he eventually does get back in there. Yeah, Brown / Hurts stats looking good. I think Brown, the tough part is that I still think for a tournament, I'd rather have Brown without Hurts just because of what the draft capital you gave up for Hurts was. But I guess what was going around Hurts right now is not paying off either. So that could theoretically help out the elite QB Bills. But to me, it's I'd rather have the alpha receiver and then have another stack going with it. I think that Brown's Hurts stacks are going to advance pretty highly, but going to run into some issues in the playoffs. And again, a team being that good is great for regular season, great for advance rate, maybe not as great for when you need the most points in week 17. And for them going against Arizona, if Arizona doesn't have Kyler and is trotting out Clayton Tune, you get to see like Hurts and Brown not even play unless Brown is playing for a record or something. So that's something to watch out for, but obviously you can't worry about that right now. But I would, if I were like a big Eagles backer, I would hope they lose a few games coming up and just get closer to like the Niners, because like right now they're running away with the bye. And if they run away with the bye, shit can get bad for you if you are, heavily building around the Eagles and they're what's driving your success. Let me take a sip of water here, and then we'll talk about Ja'Marr Chase. I have to be hydrated to talk about Ja'Marr Chase. All right, Ja'Marr Chase. So Chase, back injury, not great for him. Higgins being more efficient, bad for him as well. Ja'Marr Chase still at 12 and 10 touches per game on the year. Do you think that's going to come down a little bit if Higgins can put up games like he did this past week? Chase, though, involved in the red zone, 2 red zone targets per game, is actually the most of anybody at receiver besides DK Metcalf, who's done nothing with them. So that's pretty great. But great red zone use of Ja'Marr Chase. Higgins being good should help out Chase a little bit just to take some pressure off them. But I do think Chase has been running kind of his best possible outcome to start the year, with Higgins being that bad. Obviously, Higgins also missing games, Irv Smith and the tight ends being useless. But we have seen signs of life this past week from Higgins and a multitude of tight ends for the Bengals. Like Drew Sample got there. Tanner Hudson almost got there. Irv Smith definitely got there. So that's things that are not great for Ja'Marr Chase. As the Bengals become a more fleshed out offense, I think Chase comes down. And the back injury for Chase, like never something you want to see. He's young. He doesn't have a history of it. And it's not a serious back injury. But if he doesn't go this week, maybe you have a little bit of cause for concern. Or if he goes this week and hurts it again, that's something that could have a little bit of risk for Chase. But I think he holds up here. I think CeeDee Lamb should pass him. But Chase is going to be top 10 no matter what. And I think more likely going to be top 5 no matter what, just based on the year is gone. CeeDee Lamb, biggest issue for CeeDee Lamb. It's just 9.5 and 10 touches per game, but he's getting closer. He's still the only top tier receiver under 10 and 10 touches per game. But if he gets to 10 plus and he keeps holding on to this efficiency, he's going to be one of the top players in football. 0.58 EPA per target for him. The deep shots, not as high of a volume as guys like Tyreek and AJ Brown, but 1.4 deep targets for him, 1.1 red zone targets for him. The thing with CeeDee Lamb, he's kind of an interesting test case of like what we talk about here, where I obsess over the expected points added metrics. Like I think it's the most important stat to look at for all the stuff and what we're doing, both in terms of the offseason and in season. CeeDee Lamb is so efficient that like he's kind of masking the fact that he's just like a little bit less than in terms of volume, in terms of red zone work, in terms of deep shot work. So if that efficiency keeps holding there, like he can be there, but the volume is always a risk point. And CeeDee Lamb, like he's been great. I don't want to nickel and dime anything that he's doing this year, because I think he's been the one bright spot in a Dallas offense that is unequivocally worse than it was last year. For CeeDee Lamb, though, like the lack of volume means that if he has a game where he does come back down to earth, like some of the guys around him have, you're just not going to see him have the great day. You're not going to see him have the 30 points. So if you got CeeDee Lamb, great. But I think people, and I kind of have seen the comments a little bit, I think people are a little bit too jazzed about CeeDee Lamb when this is still kind of a shitty Dallas offense, and one that, frankly, like their peak as an offense is probably not feeding CeeDee Lamb 100 times a game. So for CeeDee Lamb, the fact that if he gets over 10 touches a game, he'll be great. But for right now, I think it's kind of a fluid spot where I wouldn't expect that. But again, this game against the Giants, be a really big litmus test. If CeeDee Lamb gets 15 targets in this game and they're comfortably in the lead throughout, like, that Lamb is going to get there. And I think he's then going to be live to be number 1, number 2 on the year. But based on right now, I would err on the side of thinking a little more conservatism from the Cowboys based on what they've talked about, where they just outright said they don't want to see CeeDee Lamb getting as many targets as he's gotten, because they think Dak should be spreading the ball around a bit more. So is what it is. Keenan Allen. I've been disappointed by Keenan Allen lately, both in showdowns in general. I played him a little bit too much at captain, which was the chalk play on Monday night. Didn't work out for me, obviously. For Keenan Allen, I think the biggest point for him is that he's just not getting open as well as he has in the past. Still getting 10.5 and 10 touches per game. That's like a very good mark for him. PPR wise, I think still can get you there week to week, but we're just not seeing the 30, 40 fantasy point ceiling because you don't have anybody taking the pressure off him. And he's got to be used in different ways, where now he's not playing outside again. He's back to playing in the slot. Quentin Johnson played outside for the most part this week. We did see some other guys working in as well, but nobody really stood out in a meaningful way outside for the Chargers. So I think that's something for Keenan Allen, where PPR-wise, I think he's going to be safe, but I think it's going to be hard for him to have the 40 fantasy point ceiling that we thought he would have. If he's not playing outside, it's just a different role. And it's one where, again, you got to rack up then 10, 15 catches in a game instead of getting 1 or 2 deep plays like he was getting. So for Keenan Allen, I kind of expect him to fall down a little bit more. I think he's definitely going to fall behind Diggs. I think he's pretty live to fall behind Amon-Ra. But I think he'll stay ahead of Puka and Adam Thielen moving forward. So that's a good sign for Keenan Allen. But overall, Keenan Allen, I think the role changing is not the greatest thing if you are a Keenan Allen backer, especially in half-point PPR. Stephon Diggs, just doing it every week solidly. He is worse this year. 0.25 EPA. Last year was, I think, a 0.36 EPA per target guy. So for Stephon Diggs, like, again, no real issue with him. He's helping prop up a lot of my teams for sure as a wide receiver I took very frequently in the first round. That said, only 1 30-point game on the year. I do want to see more upside. And again, I think that Bills D being bad could lead to more upside, but the Bills offense, not as good, not as the same as it was last year. And we really saw the downsides against Cincinnati. So no issue with Diggs. I kind of think Diggs and Keenan Allen a little bit closer to what I expect from them, where these guys are great in PPR. They're key parts of their offense, but they're not as explosive as they have been. They're not getting the same workload they have in the past. And definitely for Diggs, like not getting the deep shots quite as much because Allen just isn't throwing them as much. So that's something where I would hope that flips in the back half of the year with that defense being not that great. If that's the case, I think Diggs gets closer to top 5. If not, though, I think he's still going to hover around number 6, number 7, number 8, just because of what he's been doing. And a guy like Devontae Adams, I think, is dead in the water to actually move up. So that probably keeps Diggs closer to where he is, just having nobody who's threatening to really take his spot. Puka Nacua on the way down, Adam Thielen on the way down. Both guys still getting good work. Thielen 9.6 intended touches per game. Puka 10.8 intended touches per game. Puka doesn't get the red zone work very much, which is not great for him. No deep shots, no red zone work for Puka is going to make it pretty tough if the Rams go the opposite direction. Adam Thielen as well, since we have seen Thomas Brown take over as play caller. Thielen just less involved. We've also seen a terrible version of Bryce Young, 2 pick sixes in that last game. So we'll see if maybe they kind of double back a little bit and say, all right, we just need to feed Thielen because everything else isn't working here. But that said, like Thielen has felt risky, has felt a little more fluid. He's doing it efficiency-wise, still at a 0.46 EPA per target overall. But for Thielen, I kind of just feel like he's going the wrong way. You don't want to see 2 bad weeks when there is a meaningful change to how the offense is approaching things. And that's what we've seen from Thielen so far. So I'd expect him to fall out moving forward. Or if not fall out, I think he's going to be number 10 and kind of hanging on amidst some other guys. Coming for both Puka and Adam Thielen is Amon-Ra St. Brown. I do expect Amon-Ra St. Brown to pass these guys moving forward. Amon-Ra, the one issue for him is still the same one we've talked about. 6.9 intended air yards per target is just not enough depth to really, like that's basically, if he had 3 more air yards per target, we're talking 0.3 points every time he's catching the ball. So obviously you'd catch a few less balls, but for a guy like Amon-Ra, I really don't think it'd be that big of a difference, but his route tree just a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. So the upside is not quite there as much. He's also only getting 0.6 deep shots per game. So we're talking about a third of as many of a guy like Tyreek Hill, guy like AJ Brown. Those are the kind of things that basically keep you locked into where you are. So for Amon-Ra, I think he still has a crazy ceiling. I think he can put up 30 PPR points pretty easily. But I think to get you to 40, to get you to 40 plus, I think the usage is not there for him to actually do that. So it's pretty tough for Amon-Ra, even though he's been great. The Lions being great every week, I think, will still be a thing that gives him opportunity to get there. But maybe the Lions are a little bit too good to actually see the ceiling of Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. The defense better this year. We're not seeing as many Detroit shootouts. That's something where Amon-Ra probably locked in as like a top 7 guy, but I don't think gets to top 5. Guys outside the top 10, Mike Williams still hanging in. We won't count him. Deontay Johnson surging. Deontay Johnson's usage has been really good. We'll see what the squeaky wheel of George Pickens does to that. George Pickens could not have complained more. Unfollowed everybody on social media. Mike Tomlin said it was basically a pebble in his shoe in terms of what George Pickens' complaints mean. But I think if you have Pickens out there being less effective, being less involved, you do have Deontay Johnson getting covered a little more, and that's not going to be great for him. But Deontay's looked a lot better this year, 0.3 EPA per target. Have to give him credit. He rebounded really well from the worst analytic year any receiver had in football last year. I know people love Deontay Johnson, and he's paying it off for that so far, but we will see what happens in the shitty Steelers offense moving forward. Guys behind Deontay, Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins, DJ Moore, and Devontae Adams. So no surprises there. Adams, though, his efficiency has fallen off the cliff. 0.1 EPA per target for him now. He was at 0.65 earlier in the year. Adams, I don't know. I think the Adams ship has sailed for the most part. But we'll see. This team's maybe keying on Josh Jacobs. Maybe there's one more dead cat bounce week for Devontae Adams. But I really thought like Adams-Diggs combos are one of my favorite ones you can get on the 1-2 turn. I kind of think that Adams, if you sneak him into the playoffs, I think he can still maybe do something for you. But like the expectation for me with Devontae Adams is I just don't think he can climb up. And honestly, I'd rather see guys like Tank Dell ahead of him. Like I'd rather see some young, exciting guys. Pittman can benefit if Josh Downs is out. There's a lot of ways that Adams could fall even further, which is pretty tough for Adams with where the draft capital was. All right, tight ends. Let's cover them quickly here. Of course, we have to go to our ceremonial Taylor Swift up top here. Travis Kelce, number 1. We've now seen 2 bad games with no Taylor Swift in attendance for Travis Kelce. What does it mean? I don't know. Travis Kelce, though, does play the Eagles coming up, and some rumors that Taylor might be in attendance there. So that could be a positive for her. Known Philly gal. She actually is a Philly gal. I do know that because, again, my wife is an obsessive Taylor Swift fan. So I know all these things, unfortunately, that are just taking parts of football knowledge out of my brain and plugging in Taylor Swift things. But Kelce, though, on the year, the usage is good, but he is coming down quite a bit these last few weeks. So if I were the Chiefs, I would trot out Taylor and just say, hey, can you come to this game? But she's got a tour coming up too. So never have we seen more noteworthy splits. You guys know me. Like, I love the data. I love things too that are actual data and not bullshit. Like, this team is 15-1 against the spread in their last one. It doesn't fucking matter. Taylor Swift, though, has meant a meaningful impact on Travis Kelce's median outcome. I think this is something where you all, even if you don't want to hear about Taylor, you're, I don't want to see her on my broadcast. If you are a Travis Kelce backer, you want to see her coming to fucking every game with pom-poms cheering loudly because there is the splits. It's a 30-yard difference in his yards per game splits. Might be even bigger now after what he did last week. Let's see. What do you do with Taysom? So Taysom is tough. I didn't rank Taysom in this list because I don't account for rushing plays for my tight end stuff, which is something I guess I have to address because like when I was building the SPAGS score, I basically didn't put in rushing things for wide receivers and tight ends because I didn't want to boost a guy like Debo too much because like Debo's role, like it doesn't do a whole lot for me, to be honest. But like I think that there is obviously Taysom being a guy that breaks that, but with the pass game work, and what he's doing, Taysom is so much lower. Like Taysom would be a bottom tier tight end for me. He's actually not that efficient catching passes. He's not getting a ton of like red zone pass game work, but he's running the ball. I might need to compute him like a running back. I guess would be the way to do that. Actually, what would happen if I do that? No, I can't. Okay. I don't think I have a way to do that easily on my sheet. I would need to like redo the whole thing. But Taysom, man, I think he'd be top 3. I think he'd be top 3. I'll figure out how to calculate this next week because I need to account for Taysom, obviously, what he's been doing both for everybody out there as well as for my teams personally. But Taysom, I would think, probably still goes behind Hawk and Andrews, but I think probably becomes number 4 with Laporta. And it wouldn't shock me if he were ahead of Andrews because he's getting 2.4 red zone rushes per game, 1.4 inside the 10-yard line per game, 0.4 red zone targets per game, 0.1 inside the 10-yard line per game. So he's basically getting more red zone and 10-yard line work than any tight end in football. But he's not catching as many passes, only 2.8 targets per game. So it's like a weird construct to kind of have for Taysom Hill. But I do think he would be, for me, probably number 4 just because of the red zone work and the fact he's catching a few passes. So he's got like a decent floor per game. And obviously we know the ceiling is there too, but he's the kind of player I don't think like the SPAGS rankings weren't built for Taysom Hill is the best way to say that. But I can try to retcon it and try to retrofit it moving forward. Hockenson passed Andrews for the first time at number 2. Did speculate this is something that could happen last week. Hockenson basically up 2 targets per game over Mark Andrews. Hockenson getting 8.9 per game. Andrews getting 6.9. And we've seen the red zone targets even out as well. Hockenson at 1.3 red zone targets per game. Mark Andrews at 1.5. So for Andrews, I think he's still a great play. I think he's still in play every week with this Ravens offense, but more running the ball, a lot of goal line rushes for the Ravens. That is knocking Andrews down a little bit. Gus Edwards, every time that Gus Edwards scores, he's eating off of Mark Andrews' plate for the most part. And also, Lamar too. So like Andrews is kind of getting on 2 ends there. Hockenson, I still think less efficient. I mean, I know he's less efficient. 0.18 EPA per target for Hockenson compared to 0.46 for Mark Andrews per target. So like Andrews is roughly 3 times more efficient than Hockenson. But again, losing those 2 touches of targets, rather, of volume is such a big thing for tight end. So Andrews kind of looks more like the other tight ends, unfortunately, even though he's a little more efficient. Sam Laporta at number 4 is actually also now getting more work than Mark Andrews. So I don't think he can pass Andrews because of the efficiency metrics. But I guess if he were to get a little more red zone work, you could see Laporta pass Andrews as well. Laporta, Andrews, I think 2 are my favorite tight ends heading into the season. I've lived up to what I think I drafted them at. So happy to see it. But Andrews, I think, is kind of risky here. And Laporta can move up. So if you were to include Taysom here, you can make a case that Andrews is actually probably tight end 5 on the year, relative to the overall opportunity. Still think that Andrews is a good play, but he's going the wrong direction. Not in a way where I expect him to fall to the top 10. I think Andrews' worst case outcome is falling to number 6. But it's going to be it's going to be hard for Andrews to hold up, I think, with Hockenson. Hawkinson's going to get a lot of volume from Josh Dobbs. And I think that's something for Andrews where he's just not as a key part of the offense for what the Ravens, if they're going to have success. Whereas if Minnesota's going to have success, it's going to be probably peppering Hockenson with 10 targets a game. George Kittle comes in at number 5 here. Kittle, again, big spike week potential, very efficient tight end. Actually, technically, I think the most efficient tight end in football, getting actual volume. 0.52 EPA per target for George Kittle, 5.4 targets per game. Red zone work is iffy, just 0.9 red zone targets per game. So that's where Kittle's not going to gain a lot here. And that's where Kittle as well. Like, Kittle is great, but Jake Ferguson actually might catch him because Ferguson is actually doubling up Kittle's red zone targets per game. 0.9 per game for Kittle, as I mentioned, 1.8 per game for Ferguson. So if the Cowboys keep passing, Ferguson has really moved up in a major way. 0.34 EPA per target, so he's efficient as well. And again, getting red zone work, 5.4 targets per game. Ferguson should end up, if Dallas keeps doing what they're doing, Ferguson should be top 5 at tight end and could pass Laporta potentially. I think he's going to have to get a lot more volume to do that, but the efficiency is so good for him and the touchdown run is so good for him. Ferguson, one of the steal of the drafts, 3 tight end, late tight end build was the thing that I hyped all off season long. If you had drafted Ferguson, Taysom Hill, Laporta, you probably have the winning tight end combo, I think is how that looks. Obviously, we'll see how that happens in the playoffs, but for advance rate, those 3 tight ends right now, I think would be doing you a lot of good. And actually, like last week, you might have had Ferguson and Taysom Hill make your lineup, which is crazy because that's not the draft capital for those guys was not correct, I think, is how we're seeing the season work out so far. Evan Ingram moves up, finally got a red zone target before the Jaguars bye. We'll see what Ingram does moving forward. Not a great matchup for him, but he is getting 7.6 targets per game. That's a pretty good workload. Dalton Schultz moving up. He is more efficient than Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram, 0.08 EPA per target. Dalton Schultz, 0.23 EPA per target. Dalton Schultz playing like a better version of what he did in Dallas last year right now, so that bodes pretty well for his usage moving forward. Schultz, to me, a guy that can move up, but we'll see. Like last week again, obviously went off in that game where CJ Stroud went off. The week before, though, Dalton Schultz under 2 fantasy points. So a little bit of fluidity for Dalton Schultz, but I do think he is a guy that will rise with the tide. And I also think that not having Robert Woods out there is a good thing for Dalton Schultz because you do see more of those kind of close to the line of scrimmage targets, some of those just route runner targets going his way, as opposed to more of the deep ball shots, the kind of go get him ball plays that are going to Nico Collins, going to Tank Dell, even going to Noah Brown a little bit more. Darren Waller would be on this list, but he is on the IR and might not play a game. Might not play again this year. So for Darren Waller, did the best he could with the shitty offense, but for Darren Waller, I think that he's probably out for the rest of the year in terms of the SPAGS rankings as well. Cole Kmet, kind of surprised to see him being here. Still a very solid play, 0.28 EPA per target. The issue is that he's only getting 5.6 targets per game, only 1.1 of which in the red zone, not getting any deep balls either, really 0.2 deep balls per game. Tyson Bagent has been using him well. Justin Fields has been using him well. He probably has paid off that contract already with his usage. Cole Kmet, though, I don't know why he's this low, if I'm being honest. He's like efficient enough, gets enough targets, but it's just like he's not an 8 target per game guy. If he were, he's probably a top 3 tight end on the year. I think the spike weeks maybe a little bit fluky, but for Cole Kmet, I would say like he's done the best he can for you. Great draft pick no matter where you got him, but I do kind of think that him being this low with how he's played is a reflection that there's probably worse things to come. And it probably only takes DJ Moore having a competent day for Cole Kmet to come back down. So we'll see. Justin Fields, I think, was initially trending towards playing, but now it seems like it might be Tyson Bagent going this week. Neither really affects Cole Kmet, but it does seem like Cole Kmet's upside has been a little bit better for Bagent than it has been for Fields, who does spread the ball around a little bit more and does target DJ Moore a little bit more because it actually get the ball outside. Dallas Goedert would have been number 10, but again, he's out for 4 weeks. So we'll see. Should be back in for the playoffs theoretically, but well, who knows? Again, with Philly's motivation. Logan Thomas makes it at number 10 here. Logan Thomas being part of a high pass rate over expectation offense, getting 0.8 red zone targets per game. That's basically it. 5.9 targets per game overall for Logan Thomas. He's a fine player, but I think he's kind of in this tier of tight ends that is basically Cole Kmet on down. You could make the case that Cole Kmet's a tier break, and then it's Logan Thomas, Kyle Pitts, Jonnu Smith, Dalton Kincaid, and Njoku. Kincaid, I think, finishes top 10 by the end of the year. I would guess that Kincaid probably gets, if he keeps doing what he's doing, Kincaid probably gets ahead of Evan Ingram, would be my guess. So Kincaid is the one to watch for me. Though Kincaid actually not that efficient, 0.1 EPA per target for him. But the targets are up to 5.6, and he's had a lot more the last 2 games, more red zone work as well. So interesting back into tight end, but I would basically say that Goddard, Logan Thomas, Kyle Pitts, Jonnu Smith, Kincaid, and Njoku. Higbee, maybe. Higbee might be the cutoff. Those guys are all basically the same player. Just guys getting okay work who are positive efficiency, but not really doing anything to beat the world. And Jonnu Smith, he's killing Kyle Pitts. If Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts were one role, that would be a top 3 tight end. But as Kyle Pitts owners can tell you, it's not going to be the case. All right, guys, there we go. Spags Rankings a little bit over 1 hour. Tony Pollard is killing our guy, Larry. Yes. Look, again, this week is make or break. So a lot of these guys, again, Dallas, I think make or break week this week. New Orleans, seeing what Alvin Kamara does the next time they play. I think it's going to be a very important thing to see what happens there. Like, there's a lot of make or break weeks coming up here where we have a half season of data, but I think seeing what happens the next few weeks for a few teams will be very important to see. Houston as well. Does Houston keep passing like this? If they do, like, those guys should make a big surge upward. Nico and Collins in particular, a guy that is barely outside the top 10 of receivers. But if he has a day where he's actually fed like the player he's been on the year, like, he's going to break the slate and also, jump up meaningfully. So I think a lot of moving parts here that should be interesting to see over the next few weeks. But there we go, guys. Make sure to follow me at Chris Spags, follow the show at Splash Play Pod. Of course, subscribe down below, hit the like button, leave a comment. And I could not be doing a video if it were not thanks to all these fine folks here, the Squirt Squad, who've assembled and have joined the channel here down below, $4.99 a month. Again, you get this credit preview here, get to be a part of the Splash Play community, get a badge next to your name. You can also harass me to review your lineups or to talk about whatever you want to do in terms of game theory. And of course, you get my data sheet on Saturday. So trying to give some nice perks here for the Squirt Squad for all of you guys. Hit that join button down below, $4.99 a month. And I appreciate you guys being here. I'll be back tomorrow for the showdowns. Of course, the best showdown content in the world comes here on Splash Play on Mondays and Thursdays. So come back for that one. I will see you guys again soon. So please enjoy your days and good luck. Bye.